Was du sagst, will ich hören. Willst du Habsburgs Kaiserin werden?
Welcome to MsMojo, and today we're looking at the true story behind Netflix's The Empress.
Reviled by the rich, beloved by the poor, Sisi was a woman who led a complex and tragic life, even as her influence helped shape Europe for generations to come.
For this video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the incredible life of Elisabeth, Empress of Austria and Queen of Hungary. If you haven't yet watched the limited series, there will be spoilers ahead. Have you seen The Empress yet? Let us know what you think in the comments. She had a carefree childhood.
Welche Schwester sind Sie? Die langweilige oder die unartige?
Was glauben Sie?
Duchess Elisabeth Amalia Eugenia was born in 1837 into the royal Bavarian house of Wittelsbach, the third child of Princess Ludovica and Duke Maximilian Joseph. Nicknamed Sisi, the young royal lived a rather unrestricted life for her status. Some people believe that eccentricity was a characteristic of the Wittelsbach lineage, and that it lived on in Sisi.
Warum tragen Sie keine Schuhe?
Ich bin gerne barfuß.
As a child, she would often skip lessons to ride her horse, but the freedom of her youth was a far cry from what the rest of her life would hold.
Bitte hören Sie auf. Ich kriege keine Luft.
Dann sitzt es richtig.
The emperor chose her over her sister. Sisi's future husband, Franz Joseph I of Austria, was born into the Habsburg monarchy in 1830. He wasn't so lucky when it came to freedom in his childhood.
Du wirst dich daran gewöhnen.
Ich glaube, es gibt Dinge, an die gewöhnt man sich nicht.
When he was 23, his mother, Princess Sophie of Bavaria, decided it was time to set up an arranged marriage. And who could make a better wife for her royal son than his own royal cousin?
Das Volk wird dir wieder vertrauen, wenn du ihm eine Braut gibst. Glaub mir. Und ein Thronfolger. Nun sieh sie dir doch einmal an.
Sophie wanted to strengthen the ties between the houses of Habsburg and Wittelsbach, so she invited her sister, Ludovica, to bring her eldest daughter Helena to be married off. But after they arrived to meet the future emperor, he fell hard and fast for Sisi instead.
Elisabeth oder keine?
Within days, Franz Joseph and the 15-year-old Sisi were engaged. She had a monster-in-law. 8 months after their betrothal, Sisi and Franz Joseph were married, and the young girl was thrust into stifling court life. Her days became strict and structured, all under Princess Sophie's thumb. Sisi's first crime against her mother-in-law was simply being the wrong sister.
Ich habe gründlich darüber nachgedacht, welche Frau die richtige ist.
Franz was controlled by his domineering mother throughout his life, but went against her wishes by not choosing Helena. And the princess was not keen on giving Sisi an easy life. When Sisi gave birth to her first child 10 months after the wedding, Princess Sophie took the baby, named her Sophie, and refused to let the new mother care for her.
Ein Kind zu bekommen, ist harte Arbeit.
Ich weiß, was es bedeutet. Meine Mutter hat 8 Kinder.
Aber hier geht es um den Thronfolger. Es ist deine einzige Aufgabe. Erfülle sie, bevor du dir eine weitere suchst.
A year later, she did the same with Sisi's second child and daughter, Gisela. It is suspected that Sisi's mother-in-law was also behind a malicious pamphlet that Sisi found on her desk, suggesting that a queen should be considered a meddlesome and dangerous foreigner unless she provided a male heir.
Wir brauchen eine Kaiserin, die uns vor dem Untergang rettet. Eine Kaiserin, die die Zeiten überstrahlt. Das bist du nicht, Elisabeth.
She loved Hungary. Adjusting to the formality of court life was hard for Sisi, who started experiencing health issues shortly after moving to Austria.
Brauche Luft. Aber nur in einem vernünftigen Kleid.
Things eventually started turning around for her, though. In 1857, 3 years after her wedding, Sisi, her husband, and their then 2 children visited Hungary for the first time.
In May, the imperial family, they boarded a carriage and left Vienna behind for the east of the empire. From the moment they crossed into Hungary, Sisi was in love.
The Empress was greeted with a needed break from the uptight formality of her royal home. The trip left a deep mark on her, leading her to start learning to speak Hungarian. She loved the Hungarian people, and they loved her in return.
The language, the landscape, or the informality of the Hungarian court. Whatever the cause, by the time they reached Budapest, Sisi had given her heart to this downtrodden kingdom.
She had political influence. Before Sisi was 20, she had 2 children. After the Empress's first trip to Hungary, both her daughters became ill. The eldest passed away at 2 years old.
After 2 years of barely seeing her own child, when she finally got her back, death snatched her away.
At the end of that year, Sisi became pregnant with her third child and first son, who was named Rudolf. In the eyes of Princess Sophie, Sisi had finally fulfilled her royal duty by giving Austria an heir.
Hat sie das? Das sind wundervolle Neuigkeiten.
The birth of a son gave Sisi more influence at court. A decade later, she agreed to have another child with the emperor, and used her influence to win Hungary equal footing in the Austrian Empire. In 1867, the Austro-Hungarian Compromise established the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary. Sisi became Queen of Hungary as well as Empress of Austria. The following year, she gave birth to her fourth and final child, Marie Valerie, who was nicknamed the Hungarian Child. She cared a lot about her appearance. Sisi expressed her dislike of being pregnant, writing that children, quote, drive away beauty. She was said to be obsessed with her appearance.
She employed a former theater hairdresser who spent 3 hours a day combing and braiding her ankle-length chestnut brown hair into elaborate styles.
Standing at 5'8" and maintaining about 110 pounds most of her life, the royal was described as almost inhumanly slender. She wore extremely tight corseting made in Paris out of leather. She would regularly fast, which took a toll on her health.
And at a particularly low time in her life, had a waist that was only 16 inches in circumference.
At night, she wore a facial mask lined with raw veal. But she was also an avid horseback rider and gymnast. A gymnasium was added to every castle she lived in so she could practice in comfort.
So you can kind of see when you're in a space like this that she always took great care of her appearance and her health, apparently.
She didn't return the emperor's affections.
Franz hat dir 44 Briefe geschrieben. Kannst du dir das
Ob das
vorstellen?
alles so glatt geht, werden wir noch sehen.
Wieso? Sie lieben sich doch. Oder etwa nicht?
Royal marriages in the 1800s were more than a little different from present-day marriages. The emperor and empress rarely lived together, much less spent an abundance of time together. The couple's marriage was an arrangement for power, after all. Throughout their lives together, Franz seems to have had much more affection for his wife than she had for him. He was dutiful to his role at court, while she would restlessly try to get away from her duties and her husband.
Way into the 1860s, Sisi refused her husband access to her bed at court. This was an absolute scandal.
Both royals were rumored to have had affairs that the others knew about, but they stayed together until the end of Sisi's life. Based on their letters to each other, they seem to have become close friends in their later years.
Du hast mich daran erinnert, wie ich war, bevor ich Kaiser werden musste.
Wie warst du denn, bevor du Kaiser wurdest?
Lebendig.
She was ahead of her time.
Du sagst die Wahrheit, wenn es sonst keiner tut. Und du siehst die Dinge anders als die anderen.
Sisi defied expectations of her as both a wife and royal in her day. She was quiet and reserved, but also very active. Her life outside of being the empress and queen was always a hot topic for gossip.
Ich will selbst über mein Leben bestimmen. Was ist so schlimm daran?
Was willst du mit deinem Leben machen? Gedichte schreiben?
Warum nicht?
She liked learning languages, history, philosophy, reading, writing, and smoking. She also cared about the treatment of the mentally ill. All of her interests seemed odd for women at the time. She took a special liking to German lyric poet and radical political thinker Heinrich Heine, and wrote poetry inspired by his work. Her work also drew on her own life and restless longings. One of her poems read, "O'er thee, like thine own seabirds, I'll circle without rest. For me, earth holds no corner to build a lasting nest." She was assassinated. Towards the end of her life, Sisi suffered a series of devastating losses. This included the death of her son Rudolf, who in 1889 killed his mistress and took his own life in an apparent pact.
On January 30th, 1889, he took his new flame to his hunting lodge, Meerling. There, Rudolf convinced the poor girl that the world was out to get them and they needed to die for their love. Mary, who was herself a melancholy romantic, she agreed.
It's said that Sisi wore only black after the tragedy. Rudolf's death triggered a dynastic crisis that led to the emperor's nephew, Franz Ferdinand, becoming heir. Much later, his assassination would trigger World War I. Sisi's restless nature kept her traveling, often under an alias, such as Countess of Hohenhems. In 1898, she arrived in Geneva, Switzerland, along with her entourage, but a local newspaper leaked her identity.
Luigi Lucchini had come to the lake after reading that Prince Henri of Orléans would be visiting. His plan was to stab the young royal to death. But then Prince Henri cancelled his trip, and the assassin was left kicking his heels in Geneva with nothing to do. It was in this frame of mind that Lucchini found out about Sisi.
Disliking grand processions, Empress Sisi left her hotel with just one lady-in-waiting on September 10, 1898. They were headed to the shore to catch a steamship when Italian anarchist Luigi Lucchini stabbed Sisi. With the help of her lady-in-waiting and a few sailors, Sisi was able to board the ship. But back at her hotel, she was pronounced dead.
After her death, not only Franz Josef, but the entire Austro-Hungarian Empire was in deep mourning.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Empress Elisabeth's memory lives on. Empress Elisabeth was widely loved.
Sisi led a fascinating and troubling life, not the one of a fairy tale princess.
After her death, her husband founded the Order of Elisabeth in her honor. In Vienna, a statue of the Empress was created as a memorial monument. There were also monuments of the royal family erected in Territé and near Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Many of her previous homes were turned into museums.
With the things that remained, we tried to show a personal Sisi.
Her life became a common focus for works of art like plays, ballets, films, and TV series. Her memory and legacy blazes on over a century after her death.
In her last years, Sisi wrote, "I loved, I lived. I wandered through the world, but never reached what I strove for."
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from MsMojo. And be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.